Maria Oliveira tá lá. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Shivaya Namah. Shivaya Namah. Shivaya Namah. Shivaya Namah. Shiva Shankara Namah Shivaya. Shambho Shankara Namah Shivaya. Shiva Shankara Namah Shivaya. Shambho Shankara Namah Shivaya. Om 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 Namah Shivaya. Shivaya Namah. Shivaya Namah. Shivaya Namah. Shivaya Namah. Shiva Shankara Namah Shivaya. Shambho Shankara Namah Shivaya. Shiva Shankara Namah Shivaya. Shambho Shankara Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Ayya. Let's chant Om. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Vyo Namaha. Hari Om. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. And let's get started. Everyone hear me okay? Show me your hands. I miss the live classes because it's so nice to hear people chattering, all little chattering when class starts. That chattering is completely absent here in Zumbi land. So let's say it first part of our Patanjali mantra. Yogena chittasya, yogena chittasya, padena vacham, padena vacham, malam sharirasya, malam sharirasya, chavaidhyakena, chavaidhyakena, yopakarotam, yopakarotam, pravaram muninam, patanjalim, patanjalim, pranjaliranatosmi, pranjaliranatosmi. With hands folded, I bow respectfully to Patanjali, the best of sages, who dispel the impurities of the mind with yoga, of speech through grammar, and of the body by means of Ayurvedic medicine. And of course, with gratitude to my teachers, my Sanskrit mentor, Carlos Eduardo Barbozo, and all the people there at the ICYER in Pondicherry, Dr. Nanda Balayogi Bhavanani, who for me really embody this tradition of the Yoga Sutras. So we're continuing our introduction. So let's continue. Last time we were talking about the commentaries and how important they are, because many of the sutras are short and can be cryptic, and so they really require someone to unpack them. And then when we look at these commentaries, they can serve as a window, at least a little bit of a window, onto the history of the Yoga Sutras. So during the first millennium, the Yoga Sutras was a key text for yoga study. We see a lot of commentaries. There are also sub-commentaries. There are sub-commentaries on the sub-commentaries. And so through all of that interest, all of that movement backward and forward on the commentaries, we see that where there was interest in these texts. So in the first millennium, from the time of Patanjali for about 1,000 years, considerable interest in the Yoga Sutras. And that was a time of expansion in India in general. So I remember something reading about from a Chinese philosopher who visited there, I think was in the 4th century. And basically what he said was, any kind of perspective, any kind of darshana can be honored. A God exists or doesn't exist. The person exists or doesn't exist. The soul exists or doesn't exist. And so all of those perspectives could all be honored in that first millennium. And so by the 12th century, we see a climate change. And that kind of open acceptance of all of those traditions, it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something that happened gradually, where there was this movement toward a more bhakti approach, a more devotional approach. In a certain way, we could say that before, and of course, Hindus never call themselves Hindus, but that whole idea of Sanatana Dharma, it had many different perspectives, many ways of seeing Sanatana Dharma or universal truth. And then those started to become more narrow. And part of that was the Muslim invasion. So India was not just a land, of course, of peace all of those years. There were wars going on the whole time, but they were between the different factions within India. And of course, many of the earlier settlers also came from outside. But then when the Muslims came in, they had gone all the way across Asia pretty summarily, just converting people to Islam. And I'm sure they thought that that was what was going to happen in India as well. Didn't wind up happening that way, but certainly the influence was great. And one of the things that did happen, of course, was that people became more Hindu. They needed to identify more with Shiva, with Krishna, with these Hindu deities, against the force of these Muslims coming in. And are you a Hindu or are you a Muslim? The Yoga Sutras, it's not that there wasn't competition. There was all kinds of competition. Of course, that was held as debates. And so all of the great teachers of the day would, whether they were Buddhist or Jain or from these different schools, they would actually have debates. And we can say that debating was kind of the Super Bowl of India. So if you can imagine people today going to a philosophical debate about whether the soul exists or whether the soul doesn't exist, and having like 100,000 people there, spectators on either side, one side going, soul, 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 and the other side, all Buddhists going, no soul, no soul, no soul. And so, but that's kind of an idea. And then there was also a prize for the winners, because what these philosophers would get would be royal patronage. And so they'd have a place in the court. They wouldn't have to work, no more begging bowl. So things would definitely be looking up if you got some royal patronage. But so there was always competition, but it was very different because it was in that environment of debating. And we see that debate even inside the Yoga Sutras. So in the fourth chapter, and we we do plan to continue these and go through all the different chapters. You'll see that Patanjali, or his tradition, they're certainly questioning a lot of core Buddhist concepts there. They're questioning this idea of, for example, Atman versus no Atman. This idea of simply coming into nothingness at the time of enlightenment. So those questions those topics being questioned. So part of what was happening there from the 12th century onward was Indians were reaffirming their identity against ways of seeing and being, different religions coming from the outside, and especially Islam. And so it brought the whole Indian philosophical mainstream more into a bhakti mode, more into reverence for the different gods and deities, and more of what today would be called Hinduism. So looking at these commentaries, sub-commentaries, and the commentaries on the sub-commentaries, we see that the Yoga Sutras never disappeared, but the idea I had from my 200-hour yoga teacher training was that Patanjali was always the main yoga dude there in India, right? And you always had to have Patanjali. People were always reading the Yoga Sutras. They took the Yoga Sutras to bed with them. They had the Yoga Sutras on their prayer table. So, but your 200-hour may have been better than mine. So, but that's the general idea that we get, that there'd always been Patanjali. Patanjali was always there. And not really the case. The Yoga Sutras were largely forgotten for about 1,000 years. And exactly because of that movement, just that tidal change in interest. And then when it came back in the 19th century, it was tied to that same motivation to reassert Indian culture and identity. So India, when we go to India today, we see a place facing a lot of challenges, environmental challenges, population challenges, and also cultural challenges, Hindu versus Muslim even today. That conflict that began in the 12th century in a certain way still continues till today. There was even something just a few weeks ago about this law of which kind of people could immigrate to India, saying that they were subjected to religious persecution, and Muslims were excluded from that. So caused another series of really conflicts there between Muslims and Hindus. So something that goes on. The British way of belittling the Indians, of colonializing, was different. Whereas the Muslims came in and just said, would you like to become a Muslim or would you like to die? What would be your choice? And so, but what the British did in some ways was even more pernicious, because it was kind of like, well, you can keep your religion, but all of us know that it's just old wives' tales. And it's not scientific, it's not philosophical, it's nothing that could be respected. And so, while not as, in some ways, when the British needed to be violent, they could be violent and were violent. But there was this constant demeaning of Indian culture as something less than. So this was part of their colonial strategy. So in the 1800s, there started to be a pushback against that. There started to be a resentment against that. And one part of it was a revaluing of Indian culture and traditions, including its spiritual philosophies. Clear so far? Okay. So this new wave of revaluing Indian culture, very interesting, because it was mostly from people who are upper class Indians who'd been trained in English language schools or Anglo schools. For example, we're going to get to Vivekananda. His father was a barrister or a lawyer. Some of these leaders of the yoga renaissance didn't even know their native language. They grew up speaking English. Some of them were sent away to England. So these people were revaluing their own culture, but also from very much a perspective of both cultures. So many of them had been brought up in both cultures. And they had this scientific secular format that was really part of the British educational system that they grew up in, to question, to judge, to not take anything blindly. So as they started to move back into revaluing Indian culture, it was very much being revalued within this more scientific format. We're not going to go into Hinduism as a religion, but we want to embrace the real essence of the heart of Indian philosophy, the perennial philosophy, if you want to say, that which has that which embraces truth beyond all creeds and religions. And these people like Swami Vivekananda, they were very much the forerunners of the yoga renaissance of the 1920s. So as yoga, hatha yoga, and of course, many of the early yoga renaissance, if we want to call it that, people like Vivekananda, they were not big supporters of hatha yoga. And I think Swami Vivekananda in some ways even mentions that, I hope I didn't get him wrong, but in an inordinate waste of time wrapping your legs around your neck. And so they were saying, no, we want to go to the essence. We want to go to the heart of the philosophy. And so, but even still, they were the forerunners of the yoga renaissance that came in the 1920s, which was when we started to have the hatha yoga start to come in. So they sought a more rational and secular approach to spirituality. And this is where the Yoga Sutras started to be brought in. How can we have a secular spirituality that embodies all that we see as this internal search for truth, and in a certain way doesn't contain all the trappings of Hinduism? How do we cut straight to the philosophy? And so in this sense, the Yoga Sutras was ideal. So we're going to talk about Swami Vivekananda now. The important thing, and it's not in our slides, but important to know that Swami Vivekananda was not the first to bring the Yoga Sutras back in. This was the Theosophical Society. And so Madame Blavatsky and that whole group. And so there was actually a publication in India by the Theosophical Society. I believe the man's name was, I don't know, look it up on the web. But Theosophical Society, who actually printed their first version of the Yoga Sutras, but they were first. And I don't mention them here. It's important to mention, but they just put everything into one big soup. Chakras, seances, mysticism, mix it all together, stir it up, and see what comes out. So in some ways, it was Indian, but it was mixed with anything else, mixed with seances and everything else. A lot of good work also done by them, but so mixed up with all of these other things that from our perspective, better to start with Swami Vivekananda. But Swami Vivekananda and the other people that he was involved in there, including the Yoga Samaj, they were certainly also influenced and had contacts with the Theosophical Society. So, but this movement very much embodied by Swami Vivekananda. And so he was one of these Indian upper class, raised in a British speaking environment, and looking for meaning, really. Not looking for roots as a Hindu so much as looking for what's the meaning of life. What can finally give me some kind of sense of who I am and what my life is all about. So that's what brought him into this search and eventually led him to Ramakrishna, who was a completely non-anglicized Indian saint. didn't even speak English as far as I know, or not much. And but it was Vivekananda. Vivekananda really felt a strong calling to Ramakrishna, and he attributes his own spiritual vision and insights to Ramakrishna. So after studying some years with Ramakrishna, Vivekananda went on a teaching tour of India. That teaching tour led him to the United States in 1893 to the famous address at the World Parliament of Religions. I think it's one of the few addresses that's not on the internet, unless someone copied it down and has re-recorded it. But certainly would be interesting to listen to those addresses. But he was apparently a very dynamic speaker. And let's say of all of these religions, he was the one that stood out, because people were there looking, the ones who were willing to go to a world parliament of religions were ones who were really open to truth. And what they heard from him was really the embodiment of truth. And that brought this interest of yoga to the United States. In a certain way, is the reason that all of us are here today. Because we can say that the yoga renaissance as it occurred might never have occurred in the same way as it did after Vivekananda. So he made this lecture tours across the United States. And one of the main subjects of these lecture tours were the Yoga Sutras. And of course, it was this idea of a direct perception of wisdom, of knowledge, of truth that goes beyond any kind of philosophy or creed. And that, of course, that coincided with Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Transcendentalist movement. And just to show you how important that is and how strong fundamentalism is, we say that nowadays everyone practices yoga. No one's going to criticize yoga anymore. But in a certain way, these Americans who were willing to listen to Swami Vivekananda, they were already breaking taboos. Because this taboo was basically the New and Old Testament. The world was created 5,000 years ago, and Jonah was in the belly of the whale, and the world was created in 6 days, and all of those things were taken as fact. And just to give you an idea of how strong those ideas are, about a week ago, the head of the Orthodox Church in Greece released a condemnation of yoga, because the Greek government has asked people to, while they're inside for COVID-19, to practice yoga. So this is last week, the Greek Orthodox Church comes out against yoga. So I see our Greek student there. Is that true? Did that actually happen? I read about it here. So imagine at that time, more than 100 years ago, we still have condemnation of yoga today. And of course, people are concerned because that idea that you're going to find God in yourself, how's that going to support their business? That's not going to support the business of any religion. Of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't buy my book. It's going to be available soon. But in terms of organized religion, that idea that you're going to find God, you're going to find all of the answers within yourself, that's something that's very threatening. It's threatening to evangelicals in the United States. I never imagined it being threatening to the Greek Orthodox Church, but it certainly is. So, but there was a certain small percentage of the population that was ready and willing to listen to that message. So by the time of Vivekananda, the Yoga Sutras had been absent from the mainstream of Indian spirituality for more than 500 years. So if we look at schools, we look at traditions, we look at commentaries, we look at sub-commentaries, it had basically disappeared. And so it came back in with these roots of the Yoga Renaissance. And in the same way that it left as part of reasserting Indian culture, very interesting, it came back in exactly to reassert the value of Indian culture. Isn't that fascinating? I find it fascinating. So the essence of the lectures that he gave on the Yoga Sutras was published as Raja Yoga in 1896. It was the first text in English presented in the commentarial style. So commentarial style is what you see, just like the papers that you receive from me, and you've seen them in all the Yoga Sutras that you've studied. You see the sutras, and then you get someone's ideas on those. And so that's the way that Vyasa did it. That's the way that the other great commentaries like Bojaraja did it, and Vijnana Bhikshu. And it's just continued up to the present day. And I guess it gives a certain air of legitimacy to the whole venture, which I'm not claiming. So that book, Raja Yoga, it sets the tone for everything that's been done on the Yoga Sutras up to the present day. So do go ahead. I can't take your questions now. Go ahead and please send in your questions. Also, the pages of the book you have are a rough draft. So do please send in any comments because we're, of course, hoping to make it better before it gets published. So any comments about the text you receive, the pages, please do send them in. So let's review our week 1. In our first week, we covered Sutras 1.1, 1.2. Why do we spend so much time on these first sutras? Because they encapsulate the entire teachings of the Yoga Sutras. They say if you can understand the first 4 sutras, you understand everything. And but of course, that has to be understood as a lived experience. Even to understand it theoretically, of course, takes time. But then to really understand and live our lives as Purusha, it's a pretty big job. But at least if we take time on those first 4 sutras, we have a good, solid basis for that. So our first sutra, Atta Yoga Nushasanam, let's chant together. Atta Yoga Nushasanam. And then we broke that all down, and we came to this fuller meaning of that sutra. We said the journey of yoga begins when we come to a crossroads and choose the path of true being through stilling the mind in samadhi. We undertake this journey as students committed to a discipline, guided by a tradition, living in each present moment. So as we break these sutras down, as we start to unpack them, then we get a more complete view. And our second sutra, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is stilling the activity of the mind. And we mentioned that there were 2 kinds of stilling. Patanjali really does mean that in deep samadhi, the mind is still because there is no mind. Of course, as we go through the sutras, we're going to see this very clear distinction between Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti, the world of matter, and Purusha, the realm of spirit. And within this Samkhya philosophy, they're completely separate. They're interrelated. There's all of these bridges between them, which are important, but ultimately they're completely separate. And what does that mean? When you're in deep samadhi, there are no thoughts because there is no mind. And so if there is no mind, there can be no thinking, there can be no vrittis. So, and then the other way that the vrittis are silenced is just watching them. So we have this balance of samadhi and conscious witnessing, saksham. So it's these 2 together that really embody this definition of yoga as stillness of the mind. Either you don't have thoughts, or the thoughts you have, you don't believe in them. You don't believe in your thoughts up to the point where you become so free that you can choose. So we come to a point where we can choose what we're going to think. We can choose what we're going to feel. So at that point, we have complete free will. At that point, I can choose the thoughts I want. So when I can choose my own thoughts, then I can have thoughts. But when my thoughts are choosing me, by the very definition of it, I'm not free. But once I'm free, then I can choose what I would like to think. Make sense? We'll talk about that later. So now we're on Sutra 1.3. So now we're going to be able to go through these a little more quickly. And we've got quite a bit of time to do that, fortunately. So let's go through the separate words. Tada, tada, drashtuhu, drashtuhu, svarupa, svarupa, avashtanam, avashtanam. Of course, you can see that that line over the A means that it's long. Without that A, it would be avashtanam, but it's avashtanam. And then the whole sentence. Tada drashtu svarupe vashtanam. Tada drashtu svarupe vashtanam. Tada drashtu svarupe vashtanam. Then, when the movements of the mind have come into stillness, the seer abides in his own true nature. So once the mind has come into stillness, then I'm going to know who I am. So Sutra 1.2 defines yoga as stilling the activity of the mind. Sutra 1.3 continues this definition by presenting what occurs. Who will I be? Who will I be after my mind becomes silent? And that could be either in Samadhi or through witnessing. I've questioned those beliefs. Who will I be? Then the drashta, the inner seer, avashtanam, abides in its svarupa, its true form or essential nature. When the mind becomes still, we recognize and abide in Purusha, our true self. Tada, meaning then, emphasizes that stillness is a precondition for abiding in our true nature. As long as the mind is in movement, we identify with the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs as I and me. So again, it goes back to that thing of Samadhi and witnessing. So we don't need to have the mind in stillness, but if we believe in our conditioning, if we believe in everything that's come to us from culture, from religion, from society, from family, if we believe that all that is me, then I have no way of recognizing my true being. So that's what we mean here. All of those vrittis need to be left behind. Not necessarily that your mind has to become still, but you have to be in a place really of suspension of belief in all of these core tendencies that we have. They did this to me, I'll do that to them. How could they do this? Why is life so unfair? And it just goes on and on and on. So all of those need to be questioned. So that's why we're saying here that Patanjali says that the mind needs to be silent. So once we recognize our Svarupa, we see that it's not something we achieve. And this goes back to the Greek Orthodox Church condemning yoga, because we see that true being is who we are. That Svarupa is who we are. It's who we've always been. When we recognize that, of course, we can practice any religion for a whole variety of religions, for a whole variety of reasons, nothing against it. But until we really recognize that we are that which we seek, we are the problem and we are the solution, until that becomes absolutely clear, as long as we're out there searching for other things and don't recognize that the answer's right here, that's why the mind needs to be still. So when Patanjali is talking about needing stillness of the mind, he's really talking about that recognition that all of these other things, all of these sense perceptions, all of these roles, none of them are going to provide me ultimately with a sense of who I am. So the second word, drashtu, means the one who sees. Actually, drashta is the one who sees. Drashtuhu would be belonging to the one who sees. Let's not go into Sanskrit grammar. But initially, it refers to what we were just talking about. Initially, it refers to that ability to witness what's happening without identifying with it. So that is one of the meanings of this word drashta, that things are happening in me, they're happening outside me, but I've gained this glimpse. I've had this recognition of my true being. I recognize that I am Purusha, I'm not Prakriti. So the first level of this seer is the one who sees that, the one who sees that continually. I am the answer. If a problem comes up, the answer, ultimately, I'll have to come up with some kind of objective solution. But the ultimate answer, the real answers, are only inside me. So witnessing is a function of the higher mind buddhi, which discerns clearly between klishta and aklishta vrittis. We talked about that last week. We're going to talk about it more today. But it's basically all of the things that lead me more into that belief, more into that, if you want to call it the web of Maya, that I'm seeing things, but I'm not seeing what's really happening. I'm seeing the world gives me my happiness or my unhappiness. That's this web of Maya. Those are all of the klishta. Those are all of the harmful vrittis. And then all of the helpful vrittis, the aklishta vrittis, all of the ones that help me see that the only answer is going to be found within me. And what is this buddhi? This buddhi, this higher mind? It's the part of our mind that allows me to see that, yes, remember we talked about that crossroads. Buddhi is the part of me that comes to that crossroads, and it always chooses the road to yoga. So buddhi is that part of me that always chooses the path of yoga. Make sense? Okay. And then what happens through the process of yoga? Initially, that buddhi starts out at a very basic level. And you've all seen it in your yoga students. How many of you are yoga teachers? Almost everyone, huh? Yeah, you've seen it in your yoga student. The person comes in, they're kind of wander in, and they're kind of going, am I sure I'm in the right place? And then afterwards, you know, they lie down for the final relaxation, and they get up and they said, gee, that was great. What happened to me? That's the greatest thing I've ever felt in my life. So that's the beginning of buddhi. You know, they're saying, you know, I go to my work all day. I'm taking all these courses. I'm studying all these different kinds of philosophies, and I feel like crap. And I went to my yoga class. I laid down for 10 minutes. I got up and I felt great. So that's the beginning of buddhi. That's where buddhi starts. And so then that buddhi is being purified all along the yoga journey. And it just gets purified and purified and purified. And then when we get to chapter 3 and chapter 4, then Patanjali is going to talk a lot more about buddhi. And he's going to say there comes to a point where buddhi, which becomes sattvic, which becomes pure, that the difference between that buddhi and your enlightened being, that difference disappears. So that's when you're in samadhi, or that's when you become free. So, and he goes into this. It's so important for him, this subject of purifying that buddhi up to the point where the buddhi, in a certain way, it just becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. Eventually, it becomes completely sattvic. And at that point, he says, the distinction between that buddhi, between that sattva and purusha disappears. And that's when freedom results. So let's look at this word purusha. Purusha formed from the root pur, which means city, and usha, referring to the dweller. So purusha is the dweller of the city. That city refers to the 9 gates, the eyes, the ears, the nostrils, mouth, the urinary, and the eliminatory systems. The body and senses are a dwelling place for the true resident purusha. So obviously we're going to care for the body optimally. But I think from Patanjali's perspective, I think he would see the klishta and the aklishta health food addicts. And so the klishta health food addicts are the ones who go in there and they're buying everything in a certain way because they're afraid of death. or they want to live longer. They want to continue to do all their sports and everything they're doing. And of course, that's helpful. But that in a certain way would be using health food for a klishta purpose, for ultimately a harmful purpose. And what he would say is that if we're making ourselves helpful, it's great to live, it's great to appreciate this world, but who are we going to be if we gain the world but lose our souls? If we don't recognize who we are actually completely, not in a religious sense, but in a felt sense, in an experiential sense. Everything that we do with the body, all the healthy things we do, can all provide for a better life, but it needs to be from the perspective of the Yoga Sutras, within this framework of everything has to be with this basic priority of recognizing who I am. Who am I authentically? So that's the most important thing. And then I can do all of these other things, but it has to be in that context. So Purusha also related to the word, the root pur, meaning complete or whole, as in Purna. Purna meaning whole, complete, reminds us that our true being is inherently whole and complete. So the third word of the sutra, Svarupa, literally means swa is a reflexive, mind, and rupa just means shape or form. So it's my own form. And what's so important here is that, and we're going to see that in a minute, but of course it's not something that comes externally, and also it's not meditation experiences. So all of the bliss that we experience in meditation, even if we go for years with blissful meditations, they are not who we are. So this sense of who I am is something much more concrete. It's something more like this. Excuse me. Oh, it's something just much more, I'm here. It's something very much more grounded than those feelings of bliss that we experience in meditation. It's simply, I'm everything. I'm here. I need nothing else. This is all there is. And then when we get to Samadhi, that's why we're going to see why those levels of Samadhi are so important. Because that Samadhi of bliss is a lower level. That Samadhi of bliss is a lower level. There are actually 3 levels above it in Patanjali. And that's because that feeling of bliss is only a doorway. It's not who we are. It can be a key to showing us that the nature of the universe is infinite, it's endless, but also our Svarupa, our own form, it's beyond all of those spiritual experiences. So we can say that the vrittayaha, the movements of the mind, are like clouds that keep us from experiencing the sunlight of our true being, but the sun itself, pure consciousness, is always present. Yoga removes the clouds so that the sun can be seen clearly and continually. So this doesn't mean there's anything wrong with sunbathing. We need vitamin D, and we need our meditation. So we go out in the sun every day. So we take our sun, it's great. So, but what Patanjali is saying is that in a certain way, it's not about sunbathing. The sun is always there. It's always present. The true self is always there. It's not something to be experienced an hour each day in meditation. But of course, that meditation is a process. But eventually, we want to go beyond all meditation experiences. The final word of the Sutra of Ashanam means to be established permanently. So we see the goal of yoga is not temporary spiritual experiences. All those glimpses are important messages. But going back to that image of the sun, our daily life is like weather. So we have sunny days, we have cloudy days, we have stormy days, we have tornadoes, we have hurricanes, we have weeks when there's nothing but sunshine, we have ups, we have downs. And so what we're saying here by this word abhashanam is that ultimately, all we have to do is stop and recognize, I am that sun, and that sun, in fact, is always shining. That sun does not shine just in meditation. That sun, in fact, is always shining. So as the movements of the mind are released, we abide in our true nature, who we are in reality. Let's chant it one more time. Tada drashtu svarupe vashtanam. Tada drashtu svarupe vashtanam. Tada drashtu svarupe vashtanam. Okay, let's close our eyes just for a minute. And I'd like you just to take a sense of what is your true nature. If you were the sun and all of your thoughts, all of your interactions were weather, sometimes the sun is shining, sometimes you can't see it, sometimes it's raining. But what would it be just to be the sun? What would that be like? How do you experience your true nature? How do you experience your Svarupa? And how has that evolved along your yoga journey? If you look at that image of the sun and weather, was there more rain, more storms? How has that sunlight become more clear? How have you gained clarity in relation to your own true being? And then opening your eyes. So maybe in the future, Zoom will have a way that you can have a partner and share with them. It'll be called partner sharing on Zoom. We'll recommend it to them. But for now, please jot down your thoughts in our Facebook group so people can see your thoughts and your ideas, and let's go on. So next sutra 1.4. So we said these first 4 sutras really encapsulate the whole of the Yoga Sutras. Separate words. Vrittis, vrittis, sarupyam, sarupyam, itaratra, itaratra, and then the whole. Vrittis, sarupyam, itaratra, vrittis, sarupyam, itaratra, vrittis, sarupyam, itaratra. At other times, when not abiding in one's true nature, there is identification with the movements of the mind. So Sutra 1.4 completes the definition of yoga. When not abiding in Svarupa, there is Svarupa, there is Sarupyam, identification with the movements of the mind. So again, we go back to those 2 kinds of silence. So very important as we go through all of the Yoga Sutras, that one kind of silence is in Samadhi. The other kind of the silence, the mind is talking, but you're not identifying with it. Or you're learning from it. You're learning about your habits, your traits, your tendencies. So it's not the movements of the mind themselves that are the problems, but it's the fact that we identify with them. I had an opportunity, a great opportunity. I came across a series of tapes. I'll send you the link for it. You can order these tapes from someplace in Pennsylvania. They're cassette tapes. And they're lectures of a man named Swami Veda Bharati from 1973. So if some of you have kept your old cassette player, I needed to buy a cassette player to listen to them. But they're just excellent tapes. It's 108 tapes on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali by Swami Veda Bharati, who of course is one of the world's leading authorities passed away now. But one of the things that he says is you know when you've come to that state of freedom, when someone insults you and you receive it with complete objectivity, with complete equanimity, with complete neutrality. So when someone insults you and you receive it with neutrality. So that's what we're talking about here. It's not the movements of the mind that we have to get rid of them all, but we have to release our identification with them. So, but please write in and tell me you like my sutras book. Don't say bad things about it. No, actually write in and give me comments, helpful comments, so we can improve it. But it's that identification. And don't we all, as yoga teachers, to some extent, identify with the praise or blame of our students? I mean, how many of us have gotten completely beyond that, where we can go in and just be completely neutral and be able to see whether that student had something valuable to say, or maybe they were just having a bad day. And so this is what he's saying here about identification. When can we come to that place really of neutrality, where we have the clarity to see, you know, that student came up, told me they didn't like my class, you know, and I looked at it carefully, you know, I think they were just having a bad day. And that too, you know, taking things in or not. So when we witness without identification, we see that they consist of conditioning, which we need not react to. But our conditioning goes back so far. I mean, even from the time we're kids, it's really about, you know, Janie did this good and you did it bad. I mean, it's the very first thing we hear, isn't it? You know, this is good and that's bad. And in church, we go to school, everything in our entire lives. And then, of course, yoga says there's also this conditioning for our other lives. And then how to get rid of all this conditioning. So that's the witnessing. The other part is the samadhi, the deep meditation. As I understand it, Patanjali is saying it's the deep meditation that's actually going to get rid of that deep conditioning. We said all that. And then this is important too, that we need to, in a certain way, make friends with our conditioning. We need to make friends with our patterns, because any kind of beating ourselves up about our conditioning will just fall back into those same patterns. So to almost take these things lightly and lovingly and say, there's that tendency to criticize, there's that tendency to defame, there's that tendency to judge others. And I'm going to bring in something very current here about these protests that we're going to be having. You know, because you see some of these police, it's normal under all that stress that some of those people are going to crack. But that's the moment where they needed to witness. So, and to see that that's a woman kneeling in front of you on the ground, there's no need to push that woman. It's absolutely unnecessary. The person's there with a riot shield and with a mask and with a club, and there's an unarmed woman kneeling on the ground. But you see how strong that conditioning is. And in a certain way, we all face that conditioning every day. We're going to react to something, anything. And then at that moment, we have to step back and challenge those beliefs, whatever they are. Whatever those beliefs are, that's the time we have to step back and challenge them. And so, but this in a certain way, we're not going to keep those beliefs from arising. I didn't like that person. I didn't like that person because of the way they looked or for whatever, the way they talked, or I don't like that kind of yoga that they practice. That yoga is too aggressive, people get hurt. Whatever those judgments are, we just stop for a moment and look and ask, what's the belief? What's the belief that I can see in myself? And is there a way that I can take that belief less seriously without judging the other people, without judging myself? And in a certain way, I'm going to need to de-dramatize the mind. I'm going to need to de-dramatize my whole mind, whether it's about work issues, whether it's about yoga, whether it's about family issues. I'm going to need to de-dramatize everything, because otherwise I'm going to say, oh, I had that bad thought again. How am I going to get rid of that? So in a certain way, it's just watching and not taking it so seriously. So that's where we start to be able to disidentify, get rid of the tendency to sarupyam. So we have to strengthen, initially strengthening that witness. It does take practice. So I find myself judging someone or something. So initially I have to stop myself. But over time, we start to develop more of those aklishta, those helpful thoughts. The unhelpful thoughts, the negative thinking, the klishta vrittayaha, they start to be diminished. And our mind becomes more of a friend to ourselves and less of an enemy. Making sense so far? Good. Did I miss something here? So we've talked all about these klishta and aklishta vrittayaha. So part of this whole idea of seeing our conditioning and identifying with it or not, there is a psychotherapeutic aspect to that. And I'm still in psychotherapy, and I find it very helpful because that psychotherapeutic aspect is very helpful. And of course the intention is different. The intention in psychotherapy can be to see those things, and of course the intention in yoga is really to go much further. It's to see that you are not those things, you are not those thoughts, but they need to be seen first. And part of that is going back in our history and saying, look at this pattern, look at this tendency. And then we also need to be able to take the sting out of our history. In witnessing our history over time, we can start to take the sting out of it, all those painful moments. And certainly they have been painful for all of us. But we begin to take the sting out of our history to see that, the whole first years of my life, I was just really living as an extension of my mother. I was really just her surrogate. I was just continuing to live her life. So once we see those things, once we see those tendencies, those really need to be seen, because that you could call very deep identification. That's sarupyam. It really is our entire history. And so that history needs to be seen and released. So another exercise. We're doing good on time today. We won't take too long. Close your eyes. So look at just one thing in your life that's causing suffering right now. Whatever it is. One area of suffering. And look at how you are identified with it. What would happen to that situation if you took the identification away? Now, look at one other thing. Look at something that bothered you in the past, but doesn't bother you anymore. Something that used to cause suffering. And look at how your identification with it has changed. What has changed in relation to that person, place, or thing so that it now causes less suffering? How have you changed your attitude? How has your identification with it changed? The thought patterns may not have changed completely, but our identification has changed. And let's open our eyes and continue. So we're on to Patanjali's 1.5. We've talked about this quite a bit. I'm not going to go into it very much. There's a whole section here on these the movements of the mind, and but we're just going to hit a couple of basic points here. But let's go ahead and say the sutra. Vartayaha, vartayaha, panchatayaha, panchatayaha, klishtaha, klishtaha, aklishtaha, aklishtaha. And then the whole sentence. Vartaya, vartaya, panchataya, klishta, aklishta. Vartaya, panchataya, klishta, aklishta. Vartaya, panchataya, klishta, klishta. The movements of the mind are of 5 kinds and are either painful or non-painful. So what Patanjali is saying here, there are these 5 different movements of the mind. We're going to come here in a moment. And so we've been through these quite a bit. But just to review, all of these klishta vrittis are the ones that will be harmful, even if they may seem pleasurable in the moment. So for example, I'll give you a very direct relationship. Here at our yoga center, we get a lot of requests to come here and rent our space for people who want to do these voyages using this drug called ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is legal here in Brazil. We have neighbors who grow it and just take it in their daily tea and things like that. And we don't use it. We don't allow people who use any kind of drugs here in our center, because to me, it's just the exact opposite of yoga. Because yoga is all about autonomy. It's not that a drug could never be useful for someone, but yoga is all about me understanding that I am the answer. I am all I need. And as soon as I'm saying that I can be all I need, but I just need to take this one plant from outside me. So then it actually becomes just the opposite of yoga. And so this is the idea. It can look pleasurable at the time. It can look like something that's going to be helpful, but it actually winds up being harmful. And how about relationships? Relationships will swear, no, this is the answer. Those other 5 didn't do it, but I'm sure this one is the answer. So things can appear pleasurable. They can appear helpful. Used in the right way, everything can be helpful. Everything can be aklishta. But many things that seem to be helpful, we have to really develop that discernment, because they can actually be unhelpful. And then things that seem difficult, how about having to probe our own mind, probe our tendencies, go back into our history? Or how about even just doing meditation and yoga every day? So none of those are especially pleasant at first. After coming out of the psychotherapist's office, after we've cried for an hour, can feel great. But facing all of those issues are challenging, but ultimately they're helpful. Ultimately they're helpful because they're giving a clearer vision of who we are. So the aklishta vrittis may be painful at first. Ultimately, they turn out to be helpful. Some things like that use of drugs could seem helpful at first, ultimately not helpful, because we're the ones that ultimately have to see that we are what we seek. Okay, so this next verse, these are the 5 kinds of vritaya. Pramanaha, pramanaha, viparyayaha, viparyayaha, vikalpaha, vikalpaha, nidra, nidra, smrtihi, smrtihi. Pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smartaya. Pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smartaya. Pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smartaya. So the 5 categories of fluctuation of the mind are valid means of knowing, misperception, fantasy, sleep, and memory. So Patanjali doesn't really intend this to be a complete inventory of everything that's happening in your mind. What he's saying here is that everything within your mind, everything that happens, every thought, every feeling, every cognition, every belief can either be your friend or it can be your enemy. And we're going to see later in the Yoga Sutras that Prakriti, this material world, it exists for Purusha. Everything here is just to show us who we are. According to Patanjali, everything here exists to show us who we are. So everything that happens in our mind is a teaching. Whether it's fantasies, whether it's things that you think you're seeing clearly, whether it's misperceptions, even sleep, and all of your memories, they all exist only as teachings. So all forms of mental activity belong to Prakriti and are distinct from Purusha. Therefore, they are to be brought into stillness through the practice of yoga. So everything that happens in your mind has to conform to that definition of yoga. Yoga is stilling the movements of the mind. So you think you're already doing pretty good with sleep. Sleep seems pretty still, right? Sleep seems like it would be a no-brainer. But actually, even sleep needs to be transformed. Our past needs to be transformed. Our memories need to be transformed. Our fantasies need to be transformed. When we think we're seeing things correctly, even those need to be transformed, and all of our misperceptions need to be transformed. So everything that happens in your mind is a tool for you to recognize who you are. There is an order to them. Let's go back and look at them. So this order the order means something here. So obviously we start with pramana, valid means of knowledge. And they use this analogy in the commentaries of mistaking a post for a person. So in pramana, you saw a post and you saw something at a distance. You thought it was a post. It was a post. Misperception. You thought you saw a post and it was actually a person. Fantasy. You saw a post and you thought it was God. Sleep. You couldn't see anything. In memory, all you had was your memory of what you thought you saw, so even less valid. So you go from more valid to less valid. But we're also going to see something most important here, that all of these movements are actually just tools. For example, clear seeing. We may think we're seeing clearly, but it might also be based on blind belief in a teacher or teaching, which is also going to keep us from moving forward along the journey. We may have vipariyaya, a misperception. Let's go to these. We may have a vipariyaya, a misperception. Oh, I see what these are. These here. So let's go on. And so vipariyaya, misperception, would normally be something negative. But actually, that misperception, if we use it to see some of our tendencies or core beliefs, that misperception is actually a much more valuable tool than the person who had some idea of a teaching or a teacher or a teaching, some kind of spiritual clarity, but then they became so attached to that teaching that they couldn't move forward anymore. But the person with the misperception could actually use that to see a tendency, to see a core belief, and then to move forward. So all of these movements of the mind, whether it's a fantasy, if we can see what is that fantasy trying to teach me? What is it trying to show me? What can I learn from my daydreaming? What can I learn from this fantasy? When I have a fantasy of wanting to be the best yoga teacher in the world, wanting to be a famous yoga teacher, what is that trying to teach me? So everything that occurs in the mind is actually a teaching, whatever it is. So this is the essence of, there are 5 kinds of movements of the mind. Actually, there are many kinds of movements of the mind, but Patanjali is saying that everything that happens in your mind, it can be your friend or it can be your enemy. Let's move on forward. So let's get here to Sutra 112, practice and non-attachment. So starting with the individual words. Could you open the window here? Tanya, você pode abrir a janela? Yeah. Só abrindo a janela. Yeah. Yeah. Abhyasaha, abhyasaha, vairagyam, vairagyam, abhyam, abhyam, tat, tat, nirodha, nirodha, abhyasa vairagyam, tad nirodha, abhyasa vairagyam, tad nirodha, abhyasa vairagyam, tad nirodha. That stilling of those movements of the mind is accomplished through practice and non-attachment, abhyasa and vairagya. So one thing that I remember, an interesting comment about this abhyasa and vairagya, practice and non-attachment, just in a reading about from Georg Feuerstein. I don't know how many of you knew Georg personally when he was still around with us. And so Georg has passed on now, but one of the interesting things he said that is the main methodology of the Yoga Sutras. We have these various methodologies. We have the 8 limbs of yoga. We have also the Kriya Yoga. And we also have practice and non-attachment, abhyasa and vairagya. And he said the fundamental, the most important of the practices, the structure of the Yoga Sutras, it's really based on this abhyasa and vairagya. And so many teachers like Dr. Ananda, they stress that Dr. Ananda says that these are like the brake and the gas. They always have to be present. Sometimes you need a little more practice. Sometimes you need a little more letting go. But they are really the foundation of our entire practice. So let's look at practice a little bit here as the foundation of yoga methodology. It's the effort and consistent discipline needed to progress along the spiritual journey. The word abhyasa is formed from 2 Sanskrit roots. Abhya means intensely, and as means to place, same as in asana, same root as in our asana. Abhyasaha is placing all of our effort and intention intensely toward a single goal, which is yoga, which is the recognition of our true being through spiritual awakening. So abhyasa has 2 main facets. The first is our daily practice, sadhana, whose Sanskrit root sad means effort. So no matter what the tradition is, whether we're a Raja Yoga, whether we're Bhakti Yoga, whether we're Tantra Yoga, or in the case of Raja Yoga, they're all going to have a practice. They're all going to have a sadhana. And from within Patanjali, that sadhana is very much the practice of meditation, culminating in Samadhi. The second facet of abhyasa is conscious awareness in daily living. So we have our daily practice, and then we have our second practice, which is that my practice never ends. So the first practice is my practice, and my second practice is that there is no end to my practice. And so that practice needs to continue throughout the entire day. And then the big question would be, when did I stop practicing? Was there a moment when I stopped practicing? Were there thoughts that came in when I stopped practicing? So when I was teaching my yoga class, was there a moment when I started to daydream and think about something else? So you could say that in a certain way, maybe my practice stopped then. Not to beat myself up, but the idea would be to continue that practice the whole time through this saksham, this conscious witnessing. And then that helps us to see the patterns, this pattern of daydreaming, this pattern of wishing things were different. And that, of course, gives us this insight into our core beliefs. So practice needs to be balanced with non-attachment, vairagyam. So within Prakriti, remember your kindergarten postcard? Didn't you have those that kind of grade card in kindergarten that had all the things you do? And it was all about doing. It was all about trying. It was all about achieving. Even if you weren't as good as the other kids, it was always about doing your best. No, maybe didn't do that well, but she always tried. He always tried. So in this world that we live in, the emphasis is always on evolution, isn't it? Even if you look at sports, you look at Olympics, you look at whatever it is, people are famous because they're a little bit better. They try a little bit harder. That one who tries a little bit harder, even a lot of our yoga is based on the one who tries a little bit harder, isn't it? The one who can do more poses. And we say that the sports stars who achieve the most, who try the most, who put in the most effort, who practice the most every day, those are the ones who get the financial gain. Fortunately, we're practicing yoga, but isn't it exactly the same in yoga? The ones that do all of those advanced poses, in a certain way, don't they wind up earning the most? So in a way, yoga follows that. Yoga as it exists today, you can say, is just an extension of evolution. It's the one who can throw the metal ball the farthest, the one who throws the spear, the one who jumps the highest. And so yoga really, in a certain way, in some areas, really isn't any different from that. But that's all in the realm of Prakriti. And so Patanjali is saying that no, you're not here just to do the most yoga poses. You're not here to do the most beautiful yoga poses. That might be a tool. Doing the most beautiful yoga pose might be a valuable tool, but actually we're here to let all of that go. We're here to let all of that go, and that's what the vairagyam is. So if you're looking for something outside yourself, like yoga poses, then all of your effort is going to be worthwhile. We had Dharma Mitra visit here, very beautiful person. And so someone asked him about doing all those 790 yoga poses, and he still does to some extent. And so he said, no, it's easy. Just 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. That's all you have to do. Just 6 hours a day. So, and for many people, we have to acknowledge that really, in his case, I can certainly see that it is a spiritual path. It definitely is. But when we come to the spiritual path, no amount of trying is going to take me to me. If I'm already there, I can change this shirt. I think it's kind of a nice shirt I have on today. Looks pretty good in the monitor. But no amount of trying, no matter where it is, no amount of winning the Yoga Olympics, and of course there is a Yoga Olympics in India, none of that is ever going to take me to me, that recognition in me. It might be a reflection of something that I want to express after I become free. It might be a vehicle for becoming free, but nothing I do in the world is ever going to take me to me. I can only recognize that I'm already me. I am all that I need. I am whole. I'm complete. And so that's this balance of practice and non-attachment. Also, just to do couch potato and eat Pringles and say, I completely accept myself. I'm just happy to be me. So that would be a kind of a false vairagyam without practice, right? So that's why we need this balance of practice and effort. So, and the whole of Prakriti, everything that I need to let go of, is everything within Prakriti. No, I want to let go. I want to let go of this, but I want to keep my health food. Or I want to let go of this, but I want to keep that. I'll let go of this, but secretly, I want to keep that. And so what Patanjali is saying that actually everything that's not Purusha, that you're going to have to let go of. And ultimately, that means that we're going to have to let go of the first 6 levels of Samadhi. We're going to have to let go of all those blissful meditation experiences. We're even going to have to let go of this sense of I am. So everything in Prakriti, I'm letting go of my attachment to all of that, not as a kind of a penance. It's not like, okay, I'm going to whip myself by not having my protein shake this week. I'm going to do a tapas, a penance. I'm not going to have my protein shake. No, it's none of that. It's that whole Prakriti, everything in our surroundings, I'm going to let go of it because it's not me. It's not who I am. And I want to be authentic. I want truth. I'm not letting go of things in Prakriti because I want to be simple. I'm not letting go of things in Prakriti because I want to be a monk. I'm not letting go of things in Prakriti because I want people to think I'm humble. I'm not letting go of things in Prakriti because I want them to think I'm ecologically and politically correct. I'm letting go of all those things in Prakriti because they're not truth. They're not me. They're not who I am. So this vairagyam is letting go of everything because it's not me. And that peace and happiness I seek. So it's fine to have everything in the world. I don't need to let go of anything. But if I see that it's frosting on the cake, fine. If I'm already happy and complete, I don't need to reject any of it. But if I'm codependent on it, if I need it to support me, then I need to let go of it. Why? As a penance, as tapas? No, because it's not true, because it's not real. So, as we said, this letting go, it can begin as a practice, and it can begin just seeing of where am I dependent? Where am I codependent? So it does start as a kind of a practice. Can I let go of that? Can I let go of that need? I feel like I need. I'll give you an example. Some of you who've been my students, you've all seen me out there on the lake at Kripalu paddling, right? And you know that paddling and surfing are my addiction, right? You've all seen me with my new surfboards. And so those are the ones that we don't have to stop surfing, but we have to let go. And I surf a lot less now. And it's just, whereas before, it might have been more important. Now I might choose to read the Yoga Sutras instead of going surfing. I know that's hard to believe, but people do change over time. And maybe I'm just getting old too. Might just be that. But not really. It's really a change of viewpoint. And what we have to let go of are not the things, but our attachment to them. They support us in some way, whether it's a relationship or whether it's a sport or even a yoga practice. Because ultimately, our freedom is going to transcend even all of our yoga practices. Okay, so I think we need to complete here now. And so let's just take a moment here to have a reflection, and then we will complete. Okay, so closing the eyes. So look at abhyasa and vairagya along your journey. First, look at your practice, or your formal practice. So how has that solidified along your yoga journey? Then look at that other practice, that practice of witnessing, of disidentifying. How has your practice progressed along your journey, your practice of not being able to take the drama of your mind so seriously? And then look at your ability to release. Look at your ability to let go of that codependency. And not the little things, but the big things. Not to give up the relationship, but to give up that craving, that need. And how about even as a yoga teacher, and even that addiction to your own practice? Keep the practice, but give up the craving. Keep the relationship, but give up the codependency. Keep the sport or the activity, but as the frosting on the cake, not something that you need. How has that progressed along your journey? And please send your comments and your questions. And we'll complete by chanting Om. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Namaste. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye for now.